is Ryan Cam, and welcome back to the 1999 Project. As we start off the month of June, not just in real life, but as part of this project, we are officially in the summer movie season. And while we've got some certified bangers coming up, let's just say that the Phantom Menace aura is still hanging above all of our heads, or at least moviegoers' heads back in 1999, because next week we've got one certified all-timer, one I haven't seen, but I have heard very good things about, and a couple others I've never heard of, but one at least that's going to be outstanding. These two I'm covering today are not bad per se, but not particularly outstanding either. So let's have the veggies before we have the dessert. And starting things off is a documentary from the mind behind Perfect Days, most recently, Wim Wenders. It's Buena Vista Social Club. Buena Vista Social Club was directed by Wim Wenders, like I mentioned, who among his recent credits include Perfect Days, but has directed movies like Paris, Texas. And this is a documentary about some musicians, specifically from Cuba. It follows an American guitarist named Ry Cooder, who finds his way onto the island of Cuba and stumbles upon a group of musicians who have a shared love of that style of music. Some of the musicians are even in their 90s, and they're still playing on a fairly regular basis. This relationship leads to a CD being created, which would ultimately go like gangbusters in terms of sales and would eventually lead the group to performing in New York's Carnegie Hall, which is like the mecca of performing arts. Like, if you're performing at Carnegie Hall, you've really made it. I read the description of this movie for the first time. The first thought that came to my head was this movie walked, so Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised, could run. If you haven't watched this movie, watch it. It's on Hulu, but I have the physical. But check this movie out regardless. It's fantastic. And I know Summer of Soul is different in terms of it's basically found footage that's just been edited together as basically a concert film. So there's differences here and there. But in my opinion, the subject material is just about the same. And Summer of Soul was a very great movie. It's one of my favorites of that year, and it told a fantastic story of not just great musicians like Sly and the Family Stone, among others, but it talked about how some musicians felt like they needed to sanitize their music and how they felt restrained in a certain regard. There were layers to Summer of Soul. Buena Vista Social Club doesn't really have layers to that degree. Let me just get out in front of it and say that the music in this movie is absolutely phenomenal. I always love seeing people playing music, especially instruments. I can sing pretty good, but I've never been able to play instruments to a level like you see in movies like Buena Vista Social Club and Summer of Soul. So I always see it and I just go, wow, like that's genuinely impressive. Especially the Carnegie Hall stuff. You can tell that these people have genuine passion for not just their instruments, but the music they are playing. This is not just music for them. It's literally their culture. And I think the biggest positive that I can take away from this movie is that this movie gave these musicians an outlet to show off this music for a wider audience beyond Cuba. And I do appreciate that. Biggest problem with the movie comes to there's almost kind of a lack of narrative. And I'm not necessarily saying that the movie needed to have stakes or that they needed to manufacture stakes. I'm glad they didn't do that. I guess the movie was just struggling to have a point beyond, hey, these musicians are really cool, aren't they? Like, yeah, but I want to know more about them. Want to know like the history about them. And they do touch on it briefly, but I feel like that part of it, the behind the scenes of it all and the history of why this music came to these people and why they play it and how they play it so well, I feel like that could have been explored more. It's like a it's very surface level in that regard. I'm gonna try my hardest not to come across as someone who's trying to trash this movie. I'm really not, because Wim Wenders did a very admirable job of trying to broadcast this music that he clearly loves to the masses. I mean, the movie's in the Criterion Collection, and that is not nothing. But the deepest that I felt a connection to these people in this movie is when two of them are walking around New York City, look basically window shopping, and they come across these big old busts of John Wayne, South Park characters, and Laurel and Hardy, among others. And they're like, ah, American culture, that's cool. And one of them talks about how he always wanted to visit New York, and now he has. That was pretty cool. It was a little moment, but it was there. And the rest of the time, the narrative felt very laissez-faire almost. And I'm not necessarily saying that there needed to be deep stakes, like I mentioned, but I feel like the movie could have done a lot more with talking about these people and showing us why they care so much. I'm going to give this a good rating because of the music alone. It is genuinely really good. Just seek out the music scenes, though. That is your homework assignment. The rest of the movie you can do without. But part two of this video this week is taking a look at a movie that tries to have many narratives and drops several of them out of convenience, question mark. It's called Limbo.
You can't always save people. Limbo.
Limbo was directed by John Sayles and it starred David Strathairn, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, I probably butchered that and I'm sorry, along with Chris Christopherson, among others. And it tells the story of a man played by Strathairn who is kind of a loner. He lives in a very small town in Alaska. Alaska is pretty much the last frontier, but at the start of the movie, we learn that the big industries of this town are being boarded up and shut down. There's a salmon cannery that is going out of business and essentially being replaced as a museum. Anything industrious about the town is being phased out, and in its place is tourism. But after he meets a nomadic club singer played by Mastrantonio, again, that's a weird name, the two end up falling for each other, and her daughter falls in love with him at the same time. Yeah, all while a disgruntled fisherman is trying to get his fishing boat back, and a couple of other things that are really not important in the grand scheme. This movie, honestly, has one of the weirdest plot structures I've seen in a good long while. There are plot points that are brought up and then just dropped and are never heard from again. Really, this movie should have been focused on Strathairn, Mastrantonio, and her daughter. And that is the primary focus. However, there are other things, like the disgruntled fisherman is like, this town is going to hell in a handbasket and all of that. And that is explored a little bit, but then is like almost dropped off the face of the earth. Then David Strathairn's character has a brother who works for, I want to say, a bank. He was he was a resident of the town, but then he, air quotes, sold out to a big corporation as soon as a fat check was waved in front of him. And so he's back now because his business partners want to see Alaska. And I think that could have been explored a little bit, but it never really is. Really, this movie is focused on the drama between Strathairn, Mastrantonio, and the daughter. But it should have been focused on that the whole time. And it wasn't. And even if you put any thought into it whatsoever, the whole idea of the mother and the daughter being in love with the same man when the daughter looks to be barely out of her teen years, that's a bit awkward, that. I don't want to assume the worst and look too deep into it, but when the daughter admits that she had fallen in love with Strathairn's character, I'm like, the dude looks comfortably in his early 50s. Like, think about that for just a hot second. And then the movie takes a hard left with about 45 minutes left to go into something like a survival drama that maybe Wolfgang Peterson would have directed. Like the movie had a panic attack and was like, oh, there's not enough action here. And so they thought it was that movie The Edge with Anthony Hopkins. Like it came out of nowhere and it was never explained. This movie is honestly pretty forgettable. The acting is good for the most part. You can't get me to hate a movie with David Strathairn in it, or Chris Christopherson for that matter. And the movie looks really, really good. Alaska is a pretty state. I hope to go there one day. But this movie was just, it was weird. The pacing was weird. The story structure was weird. It was just a gumbo of story ideas that had possibility, but were never really followed through on. But I pass it off to all of you. What did you think of either of these movies? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to read what you have to say. And stay tuned for next week, where we're getting a couple of bangers, or at least one legitimate banger, in the form of Tarzan. And I'm going to be joined by my Life in the Movies co-host, or Life in the Movies podcast co-host, Jacob Martin. And I'll also be talking about the sequel to Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me. But if you liked the video, leave a like, subscribe, comment your thoughts down below for more. My name is Ryan Cam, and I'll see you in the next one.